Welcome back, friends. Dan Vega here, and we have been talking a lot about AI on this channel lately, more specifically about building intelligent applications with Java and Spring AI. Now, we've been laying the foundation. We went through some of the fundamental concepts of Spring AI and why you might want to reach for this project. We talked about kind of getting started, how to use and craft prompts effectively, using some of the classes in Spring AI. We've talked about when we get a response back, how we go ahead and turn that into something useful using one of the output parsers in Spring AI. And in the last couple of videos, we talked about kind of augmenting the data, bringing your own data when you might need to do so by stuffing the prompt or using something like Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG for short. Today, I want to bring this kind of full circle and build what I think is a cool little tool. It's going to be useful for me. Maybe it'll be useful for you. But what we're going to do is kind of put all that together. Now, let's talk about the project we're going to build, and then we'll get into writing it. So we talked about being the ability to bring your own data and why you might need to do that. Some of these LLMs, like actually all of these LLMs, have training data that run up to a certain point. They vary, but at some point that training data is cut off. So what if you had something like the Spring Boot reference documentation that is always being updated? Maybe we don't want to ask the normal ChatGPT questions because that training data runs up to, I think, September, October of 2021, right? We want the newest, the latest and greatest up-to-date documentation so that we can ask it questions. So what we're going to do is build a Spring Boot reference docs assistant that will be able to answer questions. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to take the large single PDF reference documentation, and we're going to go ahead and use that and put that into a vector database. We're going to use a PG vector database today. In a previous example, we looked at using a simple vector store. Today, we're using a PG vector database. With that, we can ask it a question, and it can do a similarity search against that vector database and basically pass some context to the LLM when asking these questions. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun. When we're done with this, we'll build it. We'll actually turn it into a native image so that I can run on my local machine. It can immediately start up fast, and I can simply ask it a question from my command line instead of running out to the web and finding the reference docs and kind of searching through there. I'm just going to be able to do that right from my machine. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Let's go ahead and talk about the app we're going to build from the Spring Initializer at start.spring.io. So I pre-populated some of this stuff, and everything that we go through today as far as the code goes and the README that goes along with this, you can find in the description below. So I'm creating a Java project using Maven, the latest version of Spring Boot, which is 3.2.5 at the time of this recording. I'm calling this AI Docs. I'm using Java 21, and we have a bunch of dependencies. So I'm using Spring Web. I'm building a shell application that I can run from my command line. If you've never built any shell applications, don't worry about it. We're adding one command here. You should be able to follow along, but I also have some content on the channel if you're interested in learning more about Spring Shell. We're going to use the JDBC API. I want to use the new JDBC client to talk to the database. There's an instance where I want to say, hey, is there anything in that database? If there isn't, let's go ahead and load it up. If there's not, let's just go ahead and use it. We're going to continue talking to OpenAI. These are the examples that I've been working through, but if you want to use another LLM, feel free to do so. Again, we need to store the documents. We're going to take this PDF, use the embedding client to basically store vectors inside of this vector database, and we're going to use the PG vector database. To get a PG vector database up and running, I'm going to use the Docker Compose support. I don't have one installed locally. If you have one installed locally, then you can forget the Docker Compose support. But this will just allow you to download this project and run it as long as you have Docker Desktop running, instead of having to kind of configure one of those databases to get up and running. And as I said, finally, we'll use the GraalVM native image support so that when we are done, we can turn this into a native image and run it right from our machine. So I hope this sounds like fun. We're going to do a few things here and hopefully have some fun, learn a few things along the way, and put all of these things into kind of a real world app, something I can go ahead and use. So with that, you can go ahead and generate the application, download a zip file. You can open it up in your favorite IDE or text editor. I'm going to go ahead and open it up in IntelliJ Ultimate Edition. And with that, friends, let's write some code. All right, so I have the application open up here in IntelliJ. Now I am going to do something a little different. We have a lot to get through. So I'm not going to live code a lot here. I'm going to probably copy and paste some code in, and then we'll talk through it, or else this video would be probably pretty long. So you can get all the access to all the code. So don't worry about following along with me just yet. You can always go grab it from GitHub and work on that later. So the first thing I want to look at is the Docker Compose file. If we look at that, we have a service for PG Vector. We have a DB, a username, and a password. And I'm probably going to go ahead and update those so they match what I have in the repo, which is sbdocs is the name of the database. I have admin and password. So let's do that. Password and admin. And then I'll go ahead and open up this port in case I want to talk to it. Or if I want to connect to it from one of my database tools, if I want to see what's in the database, I want to go ahead and do that. If not, it runs on a dynamic port locally, and then you have to figure out what that is to go ahead and connect to it. So that's the Docker Compose file. You can go ahead and look at the POM and see what all the dependencies are that we went through when we created the project. Next is my application.yaml. Yes, I renamed that to YAML, so I can go ahead and paste this in. So I'll go ahead and paste this in, and this is the, so first off, we have the name, we have the data source. So we have the Docker Compose file, but when we turn this into a native app, that Compose won't be there where we want to read from the data source here. My AI key is my Open AI API key is in here as an environment variable. I have the chat model options for GPT-4. This vector store, again, I pulled right from the Spring AI documentation. And for Docker Compose, I'm saying, hey, only start this. These ones down here that I have commented out right now are for when I turn this into a native image. I like to turn the banner off and the logging level off so that when I start this as a native image, I don't get any of that console output. I'm immediately taken into the shell. So that's what that is for. So, all right, that's a good couple of things to get started with. Now we have this PG Vector database, and I need to go ahead and create a file so that it gets populated. So I'm going to say schema.sql. And we're going to go ahead and paste this in here. And again, I didn't come up with this. This was right in the Spring AI documentation. And this will give us what we need. So now we have our schema. We talked about Docker Compose, our application.yaml. Let's talk about our resources really quick. And to do that, I'm going to go back to the web browser. I'm going to go to spring.io. I'm going to go into projects and go to Spring Boot and go to learn. And if I wanted to grab the latest and greatest, I can go to get the snapshot. So yeah, sure, you can go in here. I think mine is on the actual example that I have is using the latest stable, but you can go into the Spring Boot reference docs. So I'm going to go into the reference docs here. And if you look at this one, this document is also available as a single HTML page or as a PDF. So I have downloaded the PDF. I'm calling it Spring Boot reference.pdf. And I'm not going to include this in the GitHub repository. I'll probably put a git ignore on this. So you'll want to go ahead and download that yourselves. Put it in resources. I'm going to put it in a directory called docs. And I'll go ahead and paste it in here. So now I have that Spring Boot reference. That's what we're going to use to kind of augment the LM, to add additional context for the LM to answer our questions. So one other thing we're going to do is I am going to create a Spring Boot reference prompt. So let's go ahead and put this in a directory called prompts, promptstan. And inside of there, I will say this is Spring Boot reference.st, and I'll paste, not that. I'll go ahead and paste this in. And this is the prompt that we're going to send as part of our question to the LLM. It says, you are a helpful and friendly assistant who can answer questions about Spring Boot. Use the information in the section to, use the information in the document section to provide accurate answers. If you're unsure if the answer isn't found in the document section, simply state that you don't know the answer. So we're going to ask it a question like, what is Spring Boot? And we're going to provide some additional context using the Spring Boot reference documentation. So there's that. So far, so good. All right, so if you watched the last tutorial when we talked about RAG and being able to take a document, we took a text document and split it and stored it in a vector database. We're going to do the same here with this PDF. There's a little bit more to it because now we're reading a PDF instead of a text file, but the thought process is the same. So we first need to start with some kind of component that can load our vector database with the correct information. So I'm going to create a class. I'm going to call this the reference docs loader. And again, this isn't something we want to do every single time. We want to check to see if there's information there. If there is, then back off. Don't do this every time because it's going to take a little bit. But if there's nothing there, we need to load it with the correct information. So I'm going to start with creating a logger, not a logdan. I have this shortcut in IntelliJ to create one for me. I'm going to get access to the JDBC client. This is part of the JDBC API that we added from our dependencies. I'll call this JDBC client. And I'm also going to get a vector store. So vector store. Now, we looked at this in the last video, but now because we have PG vector on the class path, we are going to get an instance of that. So if we look at vector store, it's an implementation. Here's a PG vector store implementation of that. So we'll get an instance of that. And last but not least, I need a resource. So let's say private resource, and I need access to that PDF. So we'll call this PDF resource. And where is this? This is going to be, we'll use the @value annotation to say that we are getting this from the class path under docs spring boot reference .pdf. And that should be enough. Let's get these through constructor injection, and we are off and running. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here so we can talk through it. Now I'm going to have an init method. So when this class gets created, we're basically going to run this init method using the post construct. And I'm doing this partly because I would normally use a command line runner, an application runner. But because we aren't in the context of like Tomcat starting up, we are running from the shell, that run method will never get called. At least I don't believe it will. So really all I need is this to be called when we create this once, and I'm going to do a check. And so what I'm using is a JDBC client to say, hey, select count from that vector store. And I just want to get that back as an integer. Now I can say if that count is 0, then we don't have anything in that vector store. I need to do some things to go ahead and add that. Now, how can we do that? We can use something called the PDF document reader config. Now, this is the only one of the dependencies that was not available from the start.spring.io. So we need to bring this in. I'm going to copy this. Let's go back over to our pom.xml and add this as a dependency. This is the Spring AI PDF document reader. So let's go ahead and refresh that. And now that error should go away, and it does. So we're using this PDF document reader. We start with a config, and it knows how to configure. Like there's some different options that we can set. With pages per document, we're just saying 1. In the previous video, we used a text reader to read from a text file. Now we're using a PDF reader to read from a PDF file. Similar to last time, we split it up. And then we say, hey, vector store, go ahead and accept this. We're going to apply the PDF reader.get. That is going to get kind of those documents that it needs to split up. Then we just log application is ready. So if we run this, we don't need to do anything else yet. I just want to see those log statements in there that it was able to connect to the vector database and that it was able to go ahead and insert those. And so first we're using the Docker Compose. And in a second, I've done this before. So we bring up the container, it's starting the application, and you'll see it's processing PDF 198, 200, 874. So there's like 1,000 pages here. And now you see it's splitting that document into 2 chunks. So this is going to take a while on the first run. And that's why you don't want to do this over and over again. So we're going to, through the power of video editing, we will skip waiting for this. And when it says application ready, then we will go ahead and continue on. All right, and as you can see, the application has started because it's finished breaking that up into different documents. Now I'm going to show you just restarting the application. It will not take that long because it sees that there's information in the database already and has no need to go ahead and reload the database. So just want to stress that point, that that's something that you do not want to do on every single run of your application. Okay, now that we have the database loaded, we can start to ask it questions. Now, we've been previously doing this in a web context, so we would use a REST controller and hit an endpoint and ask it questions. We're in the context of a Spring Shell application, so I need to build a component that can respond to those shell commands. So I'm going to create a new Java class. I'm going to call this the Spring Assistant command. Again, if you're new to Spring Shell, don't worry about it. In the world of Spring Shell, these things are called commands. So I'm going to say this is a command. We need to create a command and give it like a key. So when we type in Spring Shell, we type something to kind of kick off this method. In this case, I'm going to just call this Q for question. We're asking a question. So this is going to return a string. We'll call this question. This is going to have a default value for a message. So I'm going to say default value is what is Spring Boot. So if we don't have anything, it asks a question, and this will be something for message, right? So let's just return empty string for now. And that is our command. Whoops, did I not say command? All right. So now we have this kind of shell of our application. To find this, we will need to scan for those commands. So command scan, that will work. And then in here, we need to do something. So let's start with this. Again, I'm going to copy some information here, bring this here. We have our chat client, so we've been using this in all of our MVC request REST controllers where we need to actually make a call out to the LLM. We need a chat client, and we'll get that through constructor injection. We need a vector store. We now have one, right? We have a PG vector store, and we need a resource. And this resource is our Spring Boot reference, our string template, our prompt, if you will. So with that, I think we can go ahead and copy and paste this in. Let's see what this looks like. And I think I need one more method here to kind of make this work. And then we'll talk through this. So when we start this application and the Spring Shell comes up, we type in Q, we give it a message to search for. So we create a prompt template from that prompt template that we've stored earlier. We have to fill in some of those parameters. What is the message? What are the documents? So we're getting the documents by finding similar documents. We're doing a similarity search against our vector store. So we did this in a previous video. We're doing it again here. This is because we don't want to send 1,000 pages of PDF documents along with our, in the context of our prompt to the LLMs, in this case, OpenAI's GPT-4. So we are getting just the relevant information to send along. Then we're calling chatClient.call with our prompt template. We're getting the result back as a string. So far, this should work. I think we have everything in place. Let's see if we can get this to work, and then we'll focus in on turning this into a native application. So in a shell application, this shell comes up. You can go ahead and type help to see what commands are available. So these are the built-in commands. The default command that we have is Q. So I could say Q, what is the REST client in Spring? Let's go ahead and type that. Now you see it's taking a second here. It's kind of it's pointing the similarity search, pointing the documents, and then sending the response or the request off to OpenAI's GPT-4, and then getting the response back. It says the REST client is a tool you can use to call remote REST services. It provides a functional API, but is blocking rather than reactive. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but that is our answer back. Now, again, we can get more specific here, right? Like, what if I said, what is a @REST controller, and can you provide code examples? So now we should get kind of a simple explanation of what a REST controller is in the context of a web application, and maybe some code samples to get us started. And so it's thinking, sending off the request, getting back the response, and there we go. So we have an example of what it is, and here's an example in code on how that might work. So this is great. This is a nice little tool that I can use. Now it's just running in my IDE. The next step is we will want to turn this into a native application that I can install on my local machine that runs fast, uses less memory, and I can just always run from my command prompt. So let's do that now. When we started this project, we selected the GraalVM native image support from the dependencies dropdown at start.spring.io. So essentially, we could just go in, open up a terminal, run the Maven wrapper command -p to switch over the native profile and native compile. And we would essentially compile a native application that could be run on my machine. Now, I'll save you the trouble. If you did that and you went, it would create an artifact for you. But if you went to run it, you would get an error. And there's a reason for that. This is because Java is a statically typed language, right? We can all agree on that. But it has a lot of dynamic capabilities. Things like reflection and proxies and resources. Oh, in Spring, that's something we're using, a resource. So if you looked at the stack trace of the error that happened when you tried to run that native executable, it would say, hey, I'm looking for something called this PDF or this prompt template that we created, and I can't find it. And that's because we define those as resources in our Spring application. So anything that's kind of dynamic, GraalVM or the compiler needs to know ahead of time. It needs to figure this out before we go ahead and create that native executable. So a lot of the Spring Portfolio projects already have all these hints baked into it, so you don't have to do that for your Spring applications. But whenever we start to add some new code, we need to resolve these things. And these two things are those PDFs and the prompt template that we created. So we're going to provide some hints to the compiler so it knows about these. So let's go ahead and create a new Java class. I'm going to call this my hints registrar. That is a class that is going to implement something called the runtime hints registrar. Right? We'll go ahead and implement a method there called register hints. And from the hints stand, we can use something called the resources, which is the resource hints. And we can register a pattern. And we can say, hey, just go ahead and include all PDFs. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go ahead and do this as well for the resources for registering a pattern for star.st, which stands for that string template, that prompt that we created before. So now we have given the compiler some notification of things that are going to happen at runtime that we will go ahead and let it know about now. So it knows that those are resources that we're going to need. So with that, I think we have everything. We should be able to open up a terminal here. And let's go ahead and use the Maven wrapper. So Maven wrapper. We're going to switch over to the native profile. So we'll say native. And we're going to run the native compile command. And if everything works, I probably should skip test 2. Let's just do that now before I forget. So boom, skip tests. Now, if everything works out good, we're going to go through here. This is going to take a little bit. It's going to compile a native executable. Again, this is the trade-off, right? It's a little bit longer to create this executable. But this isn't something that we're doing in our inner loop development all of the time. This is kind of our one-time thing, and possibly something I could even do in like CI/CD, right? So I'm not going to make you watch this. We'll, through the power of video editing, skip ahead and see if we have our native executable. All right, so we have a native executable that we can go ahead and run now. So if we go into the target folder, we should have an SB AI docs. So if we go ahead and run that, we are already in use. That's right. So let's do that. And let's try that one more time. And you see it instantly starts up. We get this command we can run. Hey, what is Spring Boot? Whoops. So let me try that again. Oh no. There we go. Let me go ahead and run that again. And we're getting an error, failed to read resource. So we can run a stack trace on this. And this is the exact error that I was trying to avoid by adding those hints, but I missed a step. So we have this hints registrar, right? First off, this needs to be a configuration class. We forgot to add something to our main class here, which is import runtime hints, and we got to pass in that hints registrar.class. So that is what I was trying to avoid by writing that in the first place, but we did not avoid it. So back to the drawing board, we are going to exit this, and we are going to run our native compile again. So let's not watch this. Let's fast forward and have our native executable running. All right, so we are back. Let's go ahead and try this again. We are going to go into the target folder and run AI docs. And that immediately starts up and drops us into a shell. What is Spring Boot? Let's see if we can answer that question. And now we see it thinking. It's not giving us that error. It's not talking about resources not found. It should come back with an answer, which is what we were looking for. Cool. So we have an answer. I'm not going to read through it, but that's our answer. Cool. Now we have a native executable. We have a native application that we can work with, right? I want to do something with this. I want to, first off, let me grab the, let's see, the local, what is this? So yeah, that's my users Vega's downloaded AI docs, and then target. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this path, and I'm going to go ahead on another screen here, open up my ZSHRC file. So let me go ahead and do that. ZSHRC. Now again, the only reason I don't want to do that, I don't want to show you, is because I do have some sensitive information in there. So we don't want to just go ahead and share that on screen. But I'm going to open that up. I'll show you what I ended up putting in here. So I'm going to add an alias for that. So let's go ahead and say alias for SB docs is equal to users Vega downloads AI docs target AI docs, right? So AI docs. So now if I close that, I'm going to close that, and I'm going to close that, and we're going to come over and open up a terminal. Let me just open up one here. And now from here, I should be able to just type SB docs. You see that it starts up and drops me in a shell. Now, you'll see that I'm getting that logging. Remember, I showed you in application.yaml, there's those things that you can kind of uncomment. One of them was to turn the logging off and turn the root logger off and turn the banner off. So if you want to turn those off, you won't even see that. I'll just kind of drop you into a shell, which is what we want for kind of our local machine. And then we can say, what is the difference between REST client and REST template? Can you provide code examples? So again, this is just me asking a question to the documentation without having to open up a browser, go find the docs, go to the appropriate section of the documentation, see some code examples, maybe go over to GitHub and look for a code example. Anytime I kind of open browser windows, I start to get distracted and taken away from what I'm doing. So I like that I can just kind of be in here, I get an answer. Here's what it is, the REST client and the REST template. The REST template is synchronous. Here's how it works. On the other hand, REST client is newer, non-blocking, reactive web client that is part of Spring Webflux. That is not true. So we may have to adjust our prompts. One thing we could do is add in kind of the different roles. One of those is like the system level role. Like, hey, make sure you are using the documentation first. If you don't know the answer to it, please don't go ahead and try and answer it. But hey, we got some information here. We can kind of tweak that. All right, friends, I hope you found that useful. Really taking a lot of the concepts that we've been learning on this channel about AI, about Spring AI in general, and putting them together in a real world application. I have a tool now that I can use on my local machine. Instead of jumping out to the web and getting distracted, I have a command line terminal open all the time. I can kind of switch to that workspace on my laptop, simply fire off a question and get an answer to it. And again, you want to be thoughtful about the prompt that you're sending. Like, don't just say, hey, what is a REST client? Make sure you ask, like, hey, what is a REST client? Why is it different than a REST template? And show me some code examples. Or, based on whatever questions you have, make sure that we go back to the introduction video of Spring AI, where we talked about prompt engineering, the idea of being able to effectively communicate with the LLM. Those things are important when we're doing it. So don't just ask it these simple questions. Be very detailed in what you're trying to get out of it. So I thought this was fun. We have this nice application. I would really love some feedback from you. Was this fun building? Is this something that you'll use on your local machine? And PRs are welcome. If you have an idea of how you want to enhance this, please feel free to let me know. But most importantly, friends, if you found value in this, do me a big favor, leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding, friends.